American linguist Noam Chomsky, let me get his picture up here for us, is that he says this about propaganda. He says, effective propaganda is that you want to create a slogan that nobody's going to be against and everybody is going to be for. And certainly I think that applies to our study in critical race theory. We're going to be unpacking that a little bit more tonight. But critical race theory sometimes masquerades as social justice, equity, anti-racism, or systemic racism. And we want to keep, in our conversation tonight, what we want to do is kind of keep this as simple as possible, because I think it's easy to get lost in the academics. And so instead, I want to be able to explain critical race theory simply and be able to understand it better so we can make our own informed decisions about it. So we're going to jump in just a moment. We'll be right back. My guest with me tonight is Leroy Hill. Welcome to the broadcast, Leroy.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. Hey, tell us a little bit. Give us the Cliff Notes version of Leroy Hill, his story.
Well, that is the story. Well, I was born in, no, I'm kidding. I was born actually in Southwest Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, grew up there my whole life, left home, joined the Marine Corps, spent 6 years in the Marine Corps, ultimately worked my way into college, ministry for several years in Newport News, Virginia, pastoring at a church out there. Mm-hmm. And now I am an admissions officer at a seminary and an adjunct professor there.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you taking time. I know that that it's always hard to give up some evening space, but I appreciate you taking time to do that and visit with us tonight in these areas. And so I just like to maybe work through some questions. So the first question that I have on this topic is, what is critical race theory? Give us your elevator pitch, I guess, definition or understanding of this particular way of thinking.
Yeah, I think that critical race theory is a derivative of critical theory. Critical theory being a theory that begins way back in Germany by the Frankfurt School, which is then developed to serve the features of law, critical theory and law, and then one of those derivatives is critical race theory. And what that theory basically means is that culture, Western culture, is devised or organized in such a way to enfranchise whites and to disenfranchise those who are non-whites. That is like the simplest way I can put it. And critical race theory is the theory that they use in order to classify or make their case that this belief is in effect.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. I appreciate that. So it's really saying that the whole structure of society is rigged to benefit whites and to not benefit people of color. Do I have that correct?
That is the bottom line. That is the bare bones bottom line. That's what we all need to know.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that people often misunderstand is that this is not just a concept or a philosophy, a way of thinking, but this is really a call to activism. And so really what critical race theory is seeking to do is to dismantle or redefine our basic structures of our social life. And that goes all the way down from our political structures, our legal structures, and many aspects of our daily lives. So we're talking here about some of these questions, and I would like to just bring up the next one here. Let me get that. We talked about what is critical race theory, and so let's move on to this one. Is that what are the core claims of critical race theory?
The core claims of critical race theory. You probably the best way that I've understood it is that it is almost like a religious faith, in the
Mm-hmm.
sense that it has original sin. Original sin is white supremacy. The way that you expiate or get rid of original sin is through agreement that this country is thoroughly and essentially white supremacist if you're not white.
Mm-hmm.
The third, probably the most important claim, is its epistemological claim, which is that um, no one can invalidate your experience of racism. And because
Okay.
no one can invalidate your experience of racism, you are free to extrapolate any racist incident that happened to you out into, all of society.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are, and there are other features like intersectionality. Intersectionality is the way in which they devise or decide who is the most disenfranchised within society. But I mean, very simply, those are the claims, that your experience is of singular importance. That
Yeah.
the way that whites are to expiate their sins is to agree that this country is a white supremacist, and to be an ally who only does whatever the larger group says, but is not allowed to think. And it is a pretty pernicious set of ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. I like what you touched on there in your last comment or so, where the idea is that no one is allowed to disagree. Because what we're doing here right now with this broadcast, the critical race theorist would say, well, naturally, you got an old white guy there, and what he's
Hmm.
trying to do is to protect
Hmm.
the system the way it is. But with respect to you, they would say that you are a person of color who has
Sure.
internalized your impression. And
Yeah.
so, and so it's not that you're thinking for yourself, is that you're just kind of following in step or following in step with the white culture, and you have like what's called a false consciousness. Instead of seeing
Sure.
reality and the world the way it really is that you've bought into the system, and
Hmm.
you're not even aware that maybe that's the way you're operating. So that no matter what critique you might bring against critical race theory, you're wrong because
Right.
you know, because the only proper way to understand life in American society is through the lens of critical race theory. So I
Yeah.
go ahead.
I would say what's very interesting about that is C.S. Lewis tackled these issues in the
Mm-hmm.
1940s when they first began to rear their ugly head.
Mm-hmm.
And the first place I saw it was in a riddle he told. The riddle went something like this: a man was being chased by his near enemy. His wife got word that he was being chased and asked, "Should I destroy the bridge so that neither you can pass or your near enemy can pass? Or
Mm-hmm.
should I leave the bridge up so that your near enemy can pass and you can pass?" I puzzled over that when I first read it because I couldn't figure out what he was trying to say. Now, if you take the bridge to mean reason,
Mm-hmm.
right? What the
Okay.
wife was asking is, honey, if you use reason, can your enemy use reason? Or if your
Mm-hmm.
enemy cuts you off from using reason, you have to. He's also cut off from using reason. And the point is, when they make those claims, essentially what they're suggesting is that we are not allowed to think, we're not allowed to use reason, but they're allowed to use reason. So the
Mm-hmm.
claim has a psychological effect, which prevents us from thinking, which prevents our voices from being heard, and it also has a philosophical effect, which argues that we are not allowed to think for ourselves, and the only thoughts that matter are those who make the original claims. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
that's how I respond to them.
It's kind of the game is rigged. So
Right.
it's
Right.
it's the house table that you're playing at, and
Yeah.
there's
That's
absolutely
exactly right.
no way you can win unless you play according to their rules. You know.
That's exactly right. So our responsibility is to say to our opponents, if you're going to use reason to make your claims about my thoughts, then I'm going to be able to use reason as well to either refute, rebut, or agree with
Hmm.
your claims.
Yeah.
But you're not. You're. I'm not going to allow you to cut me off for my reason. He wrote an article called "On Bulverism," and Bulverism was simply the way in which they are arguing right now, which says you think this way because you're white, or you think this way because
Yeah.
you're black. Your reason is never given any credit or considered, and it can't because if they were to take your reasoning seriously, that means they'd have to answer questions that they don't want to answer themselves. So
Hmm.
they choose the psychological argument, which is to somewhat shame us into thinking that we only think this way because we either want to maintain power or because we're somehow intellectually weak, rather than to deal with the content of our ideas. So it's a
Yeah.
psychological and a philosophical claim.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good observations. Let's continue to work through these questions here. We just have a couple more to go here tonight, and that we talked about what are the core claims of critical race theory. How about this? Why did this philosophy catch your attention?
That is. I'm going to tell you that's a great question. I grew up in South, like I said, in Southwest Philly. I
Mm-hmm.
grew up in a time where Philadelphia was racially segregated, and I was born in '66, so I'm in my 50s, and I saw what our country was like when I was a kid, where
Yeah.
whites and blacks in Philadelphia hardly had any relationships. And then by the time I became of age, I got into my 20s, joined the Marine Corps, and here's what happened. We weren't having these conversations. We'd moved past the so-called racist past of our country, and we were learning to live with each other and learning to deal with each other imperfectly,
Mm-hmm.
not perfectly, but we were really working ourselves through through living, in America and being responsible for ourselves and being accountable. But
Yeah.
then these ideas began to bubble up to the surface. And these ideas kind of turned the notion that I had to treat whites never did anything um, uh, altruistically, or should I say, whites
Mm-hmm.
never did anything for the good of anybody else other than whites, and
Mm-hmm.
blacks were always the victims. These ideas turned, at least the way that I construed the world, and others who are born in the same era that I was, um, on its head, and they were making claims that we'd never even considered in the past, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, and that's what got me thinking about them. It was just
Yeah.
a massive societal change in an instance, raising voices and questions that I think had long been settled, or at least somewhat settled.
Yeah. And of course, the critical race theorist would disagree with you because they would say that that the advances of the civil rights movement were actually illusory.
Hmm.
The only reason why whites they were kind of essentially throwing a bone to appease the people of color, and that whatever legal legal or social advancements that were made were really for the benefit of whites. And so
They have to say that though.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
They have to say that because if you turn that critical eye back on to people and begin to critique cultures and
mm-hmm,
ideas and the way that we think and the outwork and the results of those thoughts, then the accusation, because remember, I would say to your viewers, you have to remember, at bottom, this is a psychological attack. It's not a logical attack. It's not even a well-reasoned
mm-hmm,
attack. It's a psychological attack meant to get you on the defense so that you will spend your time debating these ideas rather than thinking about the crucial questions like, okay, they're making this claim, but what specifically about that group of people? How are they living? How are they making decisions? And what is the result of those decisions? You can't have a society where the majority of the children raised in that society are raised in broken homes and not have an effect in the real world. You cannot have a society where a large portion of those children don't have fathers at home or have multiple fathers in the same home. You cannot have that and then have what is a decent society or
Yeah.
good results. And pardon me because I get angry when I think about this. I have
That's
nephews. I
fine.
had a nephew last year who was murdered not by a white man, but murdered by a young man who looks just like him. I have friends who are literally on my Facebook feed, whose sons were murdered by young men who look like them, and that is not because of white supremacy. That is not because of uh, white power or critical race theory. It's because they don't have dads at home. It's because 9 times out of 10 they are broken families. It is because they are raised in this nihilist culture that forsakes good
Yeah.
and beauty and truth and envelops and loves people who fight against snitches. How can you have a, and I'm sorry because you probably have to cut this, but how can you have
No,
a
no, no, no.
city
That's fine.
how can you have a city where the majority of young people are shot and killed, and all the mayor can talk about is white people? How can you have
Yeah.
this? I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't. It strains credulity.
Mm-hmm.
It is insanity, and I'm angry about it. And
Mm-hmm.
if I was a different person, I would say probably more straightforward things and more harsh things about it. And I'm old enough that I don't care who likes it or who doesn't like it. I don't care who tells me how people feel about it. It's the truth, and we
Mm-hmm.
have a society that is destroying itself. And you have
Yeah.
people like the critical race theorists who are using our pain and our suffering to gain what really is the goal, and that is political power. If you look
Power.
at all the
Power.
Black Lives Matter activists, they've gotten rich, they've gotten power, they've gotten affluence, and they're all leaving the movement. So my point is, um, there's this old saying that when you point fingers, you better remember that there are four more pointing back at you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the question that I would say to people who disagree with me. Let's turn this critical eye back on ourselves. If you want to claim that there are other people that are hindering us, okay, that's fine. But let's not hinder ourselves. Let's not shoot ourselves in the foot, right? Let's not
Mm-hmm.
disenfranchise ourselves. And
Yeah.
once we're doing that, then maybe we can probably do what some of these other things they have issues with. But that's not that's not the case. I don't think it is. I mean, I could go, hammer and tong on this discussion, and
No,
yeah.
I appreciate your perspective. So, and one last question here for tonight is that we talked about what kind of caught your attention, why this philosophy caught your attention. But how about this one? If you had to give us your laundry list of the top problems or give us your laundry list of the top problems that you see with critical race theory, what are some of those problems that you see with critical race theory?
So let me say this: the most ingenious and yet insidious thing about critical race theory is that it's managed to hide what its true goals are
Mm-hmm.
from the rest of society. Its true goal is power. Period. It wants power. I mean, if you read the critical race theorists themselves, they will tell you that they're not against discrimination. The only way to remedy past discrimination is future discrimination. So they're not against discrimination. What they
Mm-hmm.
want is power. And that power comes in the form of money, it comes in the form of influence and affluence, and it comes in the form of political power, which is the ultimate goal. Because once you have power, on their view, then you can shape the world to become what it is that you like. So hats off to them because they've managed to keep us arguing about issues that don't really make sense. I think that if there was one thing that I would say is its top issue or its top threat or its top point it is that it's real, that it's managed to hide what its real pursuits are.
Yeah.
And the second thing about critical race theory that I would suggest is uh, is it's incredibly pernicious is that it uses well-meaning black people, well-meaning black Christians, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
who want to identify with people and their plight, and it plays on their emotions to get them to say things about other members of our society that we would never have said
Mm-hmm.
20 years ago, 30 years
Yeah.
ago. So it is largely a psychological game
Mm-hmm.
that is totally meant to hide the ball of its
Yeah.
real pursuit.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple of things that I find that are particularly disturbing. Obviously, we could talk about the origin of critical race theory and how that it has pretty deep roots in Marxism.
Sure,
That we could talk about how that critical race theory sprang from postmodernism and the
sure,
idea that there is no, and I think it's so ironic. The idea is that there is no truth, and there is no objective truth, unless, of course, we're talking about critical race theory. You know.
exactly, exactly. You know what's very interesting is when you think about this system for certain borrows from postmodernism, but it's really insidious. What
Mm-hmm.
the guys who developed this system, the guys and gals who developed
Mm-hmm.
this system, they thought about the West and what made the West strong. So, for example, Antonio Gramsci is probably the thinker for our times. He began to study why Marxism failed, and his reasoning is something he called cultural hegemony. In other words, let's not attack the economy. Let's attack those things, those feature that uphold the economy. So let's attack the law. You have critical
Mm-hmm.
law, critical race theory that's a tenet of the law. Let's attack race. That's a certain weak point in the West. Let's attack the church. Of course, they're attacking the church. Let's attack entertainment so that you get no rest from any other feature. And let's certainly attack education, because what they figured out was as they begin to join these institutions and they work in these institutions and they get into positions of power, they begin to reshape those institutions. The earthquake that we're all feeling is, where did this all come from? Well, these folks have burrowed deeply within our institutions and they began to wield their ideas in the midst of our institutions for one purpose: to
Yeah.
weaken our society. And they've been, again, they've been incredibly successful because of it.
Oh
And
yes.
they're not above using illogic. They're not above using postmodernism, because I just want to say postmodernism and relativism. These are all a means to their political ends. I heard someone describe it this way: that if the postmodernism relativism wing doesn't work, then they will go the anger and you're the racist wing. They will use whatever
Mm-hmm.
wing of this discussion they can to gain power, to keep us off our game and arguing about things that no one really believes, right? Like a
Yeah.
man is a woman and a woman is a man, for the real issues, which are, why do you really want us to change a system that brought most of the world wealth? Most
Yeah.
of the world wealth. The
Yeah.
poorest in our country live like kings, of yesteryear. So
Mm-hmm.
it is just a very fascinating thing that we become so weak in our own beliefs, in our own system, and believing in our own system, that we've fallen prey to us. But I think this
Yeah.
is because of for a number of reasons that we
Sure.
could probably get
Sure.
into at another time.
Yeah, and that's what I'd like to do. Is that just a couple of things real quick, because I was thinking about these when you were talking. Is that one of the things that critical race theory has done very masterfully is the redefinition of terms.
Hmm.
So when I hear white supremacy, I think
Hmm.
I have a particular image in my head. When they
Hmm.
say white supremacy, they mean something quite different. When
They
I
do.
hear when I hear the word racism, there again, a particular image comes to mind. But when they say racism, they mean something entirely different. And so
That's true.
you can use the same terms, and but it's the meaning behind those terms, and we'll begin looking at that in our next broadcast. One final thing from my perspective, and then I'll let you have the last word on this, is that the thing that deeply troubles me about critical race theory is that you cannot solve racism by racism.
Hmm.
And when critical race theory says that all of the problems of people of color is the fault, we can lay those at the doorstep of anybody in the white race, that that then it demonizes a whole class of people.
Yeah. Yes.
And we've been down that road. We fought
We have.
a civil war over that, but now it's kind of like flipped 180 degrees,
Hmm.
and there's a new racism in town, and it's fashionable.
Yeah. It's scary. You know,
Yeah,
Jesus said Satan can't cast out Satan. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah,
Satan is
yeah,
not going to
yeah.
cast out Satan. And
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to use racism to cast out racism. What you're going to do is create more
Mm-hmm.
racism. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, you think about it. If someone had said that we want to have white fraternities,
Mm-hmm.
white seating areas, or white graduations, people would have been up in arms about that, and probably rightfully so. But today, you can have black seating areas and black fraternities and black graduations. And my deep fear is that um, we have lost our ability, our braveness. That's what I think it is. We're no longer brave.
Mm-hmm.
We're no longer willing to stand up and say, you know, that's nonsense. I refuse to comply with that. That is insanity.
Yeah.
And the sham and the shame of it all are those believers who have bought into the nonsense, the absolute nonsense, and are being used as a, in my opinion, I would just say it, as mouthpieces of Satan to forward
Mm-hmm.
these pernicious ideas,
Yeah.
under the guise that they're being fair and equitable. Listen, the world is not fair and equitable. It never has been. If the world was fair and equitable, then I'd be 6'9", could jump and shoot like LeBron, and be getting paid as much as LeBron. But guess what? I'm not 6'9". I can't
Yeah.
jump and shoot like LeBron. But
Yeah.
it's just it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It really it's kind of scary in many ways. But you know, um, as I've said on many occasions to my friends, now is not the time to shrink back. This is not the time to be weak. It's not a time to stop thinking. It's not a time to bury our heads and not say what's true. It's time to stand up for
Mm-hmm.
righteousness, to stand up for truth, and to let our voices be counted. You know, all these folks have said, yeah, if I lived in Nazi Germany in those days, man, I would stand up and I would say what's true, man.
Yeah.
I'd be counted
Yeah.
down. Hey, buddy, we're almost there, right? Not you know, I don't mean to be hyperbolic, but hey, we're heading
Yeah.
in that direction, and
Mm-hmm.
now is the time to say, you know, what's right and what's true, and to be counted. Right now's the time to be
Mm-hmm.
counted, rather than be
Yeah.
counted out and be like ostriches with our heads in the sand.
Yeah, exactly. So, or intimidated into silence. I think a lot of it is what it
Right.
is. That if you speak up, well, then you obviously are racist, or you've been duped by the racists, and so you're
Yeah.
dismissed as not having anything worthwhile to say.
I was in this class, and one of my friends had asked me to visit his class, so I visited his class, and there was an older black gentleman in the class who was just given all. And this is at a Christian school, was giving all the white folks in the class just what for over his experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat and listened to it, and I said to the class, you know, I got a chance to speak. I said, you know, all you guys that are sitting here that are Christians, and some of you are pastors, you deserve to get kicked in the butt by this guy. The reason why you deserve to get kicked in the butt by this guy is because you know what's true, and you don't have the guts to stand up and say it.
Yeah.
You can say, I agree that your experience was harsh. I can agree that what happened to you shouldn't happen to any person in society. But that is not me. I didn't do that. I'm not
Yeah.
responsible for that. And
Yeah.
you can't take that anger and frustration out on me because I refuse it. And they deserve. And after the class, I told a handful of them, hey, you guys deserve that. That guy is a believer, and as a
Mm.
fellow believer, we need to be able to say to that person, regardless of what it looks like, this is right, this is
Mm.
true, and what you're doing is wrong, and he needs to be corrected and even rebuked in love and graciously, of course, but corrected and rebuked nonetheless.
Yeah.
And we just can't be afraid to do what's right these days. We just can't be.
Yeah. That's so true. Hey, Leroy, I really appreciate you taking some time with us tonight. I just am looking forward to our next conversation. That's it for now. We'll see you next time. Bye bye.